Hello, I'm Justin Briley and welcome to a classic replay edition of Unbelievable, in which Nabeel Qureshi debates his conversion from Islam to Christianity with Yahya Seymour. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more conversations that matter, or listen via our weekly podcast. Subscribe to the newsletter and you'll never miss a thing, and we'll even send you a free ebook featuring my conversations with thinkers like Jordan Peterson, Richard Dawkins, Paula Gooder and Tim Keller. The link is in the description. Enjoy the show. Hello and thanks for joining me, Justin Briley, here on Unbelievable, bringing you the best conversations between Christians and non-Christians every Saturday on Premier Christian Radio and via our podcast and YouTube channel. And right now, over the summer, we're pulling some shows out of our vast archive. We're calling them classic replays. Maybe stuff you missed first time round when we broadcast it, or maybe if you did, it was only a fuzzy memory. Anyway, something very special today, a show from 2009 in which I met for the first time a young man called Nabeel Qureshi when he was over in the UK for a series of debates on Islam. Well, at that time I brought him into the studio to talk with one of his debate partners, Yahya Seymour. More on that in a moment. Of course, if you want more from Unbelievable, you can get hold of our newsletter. Sign up, you won't miss a thing. Plus, you'll get a free ebook if you sign up to the fortnightly newsletter featuring some of my favourite conversations with people like Jordan Peterson, Richard Dawkins, Tim Keller, Darren Brown, Paula Gooder and others. You can get the links over at premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. And if you're happy to support the show financially, you've got a special gift coming your way. All the video sessions from the USA conference last year featuring Christian thinker John Lennox, among many others. Again, it's premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable for the website, for the giving, for the newsletter, for the app, for the podcast, for the YouTube channel as well. So do go and check out all of the stuff you can do there. Now to today's classic replay, and we're back to 2009 again. This week. This show, believe it or not, has been going since 2005. Nabeel Qureshi, who you'll hear on today's show, went on to become a very well-known Christian apologist, working with Zim, publishing a best-selling book about his conversion called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And I got to know Nabeel a little over the ensuing years as he came back on the show several times. Then, of course, in 2016, we heard that shock announcement that he had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. And just a year later, in 2017, at the age of just 34, he died, leaving behind his wife Michelle and daughter Aya. In fact, you can find my interview with him on his life and faith on the Profile podcast at around that time in 2017 when we re-aired it in commemoration of him. So if you'd like more on his story, more in depth, then do go and check out the Profile podcast. So today's show, a bittersweet reminder of Nabeel's ministry and really him in early days, really, when he was really starting to find his feet as a first-class apologist, thinker, writer, and so on. He'd come over with his friend and colleague, David Wood, who has also gone on to have his own very significant apologetics career for this series of public debates. You may hear him reference that a few times. Of course, that's long in the past now. And indeed, you may hear some old music from the show as well. And on this show, Nabeel was with Yahya Seymour, also a young convert himself from Roman Catholicism to Islam. So they came on to share their different experiences of converting in different directions to each other. Hope you enjoy today's show.
You're listening to Unbelievable with Justin Briley.
Time to introduce my guests, Yahya and Nabeel. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen.
No problem.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Nabeel, you've come quite a long way for this, because you're not a resident in the UK.
That's
your
correct.
Accent probably gives that away. Tell us about where you're from and how you've come to be here.
Well, now you're making me self-conscious, because when I hear all the people with the English accent, they all sound so intelligent. And that makes me think in reverse, how do I sound to them? I probably sound like a Neanderthal. But I'm coming overseas from the U.S., Virginia.
Okay, Virginia. And tell us a bit about your background then, because you were a Muslim at one time.
Correct. And Ahmadi Muslim. Lots of Muslims take offense when I say I was a Muslim, because some people don't consider them to be Orthodox. I consider Ahmadis to be Muslims, definitely. But yes, I was born and raised as an Ahmadi Muslim. My father and my mother from Pakistan. They moved to the United States in the 1970s. And while I was there, when I was born in the United States, my father was in the Navy, so we moved all around the world. Actually, I was in the UK for almost 4 years. Lived in Dunoon, Scotland, for a good long while. So when I learned to speak English, I had a Scottish accent.
Oh, well.
So
could you still do it? Could you pull it out of the bag for us still, or is it kind of faded into
try, but I don't know if it'll still work. You know what I'm saying?
That's pretty good, actually.
The Scotsman says no.
That's interesting because, yes, Yahya, you have a Scottish background, don't you, yourself?
That's right. I'm half Filipino and I'm half Scottish on one side. My mum's Filipino, my dad's Scottish. And I grew up in Aberdeen, Scotland for most of my life. So, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting link between you both then, that there's a bit of Scottish background in you both. But anyway, Yahya, thank you for coming on as well. We'll hear the rest of your story in a moment, Nabeel. But Yahya, where do you start when it comes to your faith journey?
Well, I started off when I was a child. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. Because the Filipinos, they're very big into Roman Catholicism. The Philippines they're very into the Roman Catholic culture. And so we used to go to Roman Catholic church in Scotland. And my dad's a Roman Catholic. He wasn't so practicing at the time I was young, but we were raised as Roman Catholics. And I went to a Roman Catholic primary school, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the background I came from. And then at the age of 15, I chose to convert to Islam due to several personal reasons. And might I just comment, I would agree with Nabeel. Most Muslims do not consider the Qadiani Ahmadi movement as Muslims, and that's I would say when I'm saying that I really mean most Muslims. Even if you read a book by someone who's considered liberal by most Muslims, such as Ghazali, in his book The Theological Boundaries of Tolerance, he would really consider anyone that believes in a new prophet after Muhammad to be non-Muslim. So I think that's quite clear cut. That the only people that actually do consider Qadianis Muslims are the Ahmadis themselves. So yeah.
Okay, well, regardless of that, let's hear a little bit about both of your journey to how you actually became the other way around, if you like. Perhaps starting with you, Nabeel, what kind of brought you down the path towards Christian faith?
Well, I was very devout in my Islam. I used to practice reading the 5 prayers daily. I used to read the Quran daily. I'd always worship Allah. I'd consider the example of Muhammad in everything I did, as Muslims are commanded to follow the ahadith and the sunnah, or the traditions of Muhammad. So I actively lived out the Islamic life to the best of my ability. I wasn't trying to be passive about it. I didn't think that it was something that I just believed. It was something who I was. And as I used to preach Islam to the people in my middle school, my high school, I used to tell them that, you know, Jesus is not who you think he is. Jesus is just a prophet. He was a great prophet. He was a Messiah, but he's not God. He never claimed to be God. God does not become a man. These were the types of things I used to say. And I also used to approach people about the Trinity and salvation through one man's blood. And I say, these things are not possible. As I got to college, I did the same thing again, this time with a friend of mine whom I met when we were on a debate and public speaking team in Old Dominion University. I guess they call it university here. So when we were rooming together for this university purpose, I saw him reading the Bible. And I said to him, David, you understand the Bible has been horribly corrupt. And he turned to me and he said, tell me about it. And I said, well, the Bible has come from centuries upon centuries of translations and translations. You know, it comes from first Aramaic, then to Greek, then to Latin, then to German, and finally to English. Now you have so many different versions of the Bible, we don't know what to trust. And David's response was to clarify that misconception for me. He told me that we have over 5,500 manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, the most well-attested document of all of ancient antiquity. Beyond that, we have over 18,000 manuscripts in other languages, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, you name it. We have such a wide attestation of the New Testament that is very trustworthy. And when I heard this defense of the New Testament, I really questioned it. I didn't just take it at face value. I questioned it, and I said, let's look into this. Over 4 years, we then studied the issues of Christianity. Is the New Testament trustworthy? Did Jesus claim to be God? Is salvation through one man's blood possible? Is Trinity something that's viable? After studying these questions evidentially, logically, philosophically, I came to the conclusion that the evidence was really strong. Then we turned our eyes to Islam. We took a look at the foundation for Islam, and we looked at the key questions there. So far we discussed the key questions of Christianity. Then we turned to discuss the key questions of Islam. Is Muhammad the prophet? Is the Quran really a book from God? We discussed these questions to enough depth where I considered maybe one could hold on to those tenets, but the evidence is not strong. You could tell yourself to believe it, and you could justify yourself, but the evidence wasn't strong. So then I realized that the evidence was all in favor of the Christian side and not really in favor of the Muslim side. So then I prayed. Then it was a matter of hard prayer because I really wanted Islam to be true. And as I prayed and prayed, I asked God for guidance. I asked him to show me Because either way, you believe in God. If you're a Muslim or a Christian, you believe in God and that He has the ability to guide you. And so I prayed to God for guidance, and He showed me that through dreams and visions that Christianity was a true path.
Right. So, it was both an intellectual and a very spiritual journey for
Correct.
you to that. When you say your roommate was David, is that the David that you're currently in ministry with now?
Correct. David Wood, he and I were debate partners.
Okay. And your ministry, Nabeel, is called Acts 17. That's an apologetics ministry. Why Acts 17? In
Acts 17, we see Paul approaching the Romans and telling them about the truth about God. He explains through philosophical evidence about the existence of God. And so we see ourselves doing the same kind of thing, approaching others, telling them about God, using apologetics to convince people of the truth of Christ.
Yahya, you, as it were, are the mirror to Nabeel, in the sense that you were or would have called yourself a Christian at one time,
sure.
But you obviously are a very strong and committed Muslim now. So tell us about how that happened. You say you had this kind of Catholic background.
Sure.
How did that change?
I guess you could say, unlike Nabeel, I was a practicing Catholic. And one difficulty I would say I had as a child was that my mom wasn't like the most theologically in-tuned person. So when it came to explaining Christian doctrine to us, she wasn't the best person at it. So there was a lot of confusion about the doctrine of the Trinity, so on and so forth. And when I was at school, despite the fact it was a Roman Catholic school, many of the kids who were coming from Roman Catholic backgrounds weren't believers in God themselves. And I would say when I was very young, maybe about 10, they would start convincing me towards the line that God does not exist and why do you believe in God, so on and so forth. When I got to high school, I started desiring to learn more about my faith, the Roman Catholic faith. And I got into contact with one of my friends who was a devout Christian then called Jeremy, but he was a Protestant. And so he was quite anti-Catholic in his leanings, and he would bash me about Catholicism, tell me the Pope is the Antichrist, so on and so forth. He was into these conspiracy theory books. And so we had a lot of fruitful discussions there. And I tried my best to get into studying Christianity properly because I wanted to devote myself to Christ at that time. And so I watched some debates. In fact, I watched one of Nabeel's colleagues, Dr. James White. He had a debate with a Roman Catholic apologist called Robert Sungenis, and I used to watch those debates, and that got me quite heavily into it. In the end, I decided that it would be fruitless of me to just research inter-Christian polemics, and so I started researching outside of Christianity. And I would say the biggest stumbling block for me was the salvation through the blood atonement of Jesus' death and the concept of the Trinity, which, in my opinion, no rational person can deem to be monotheistic. So those were the big things for you, and were those the things that you would say actually turned you towards Islam, ultimately? Naturally, they would turn me towards Unitarianism, but at the same time, I would say that Unitarian Christianity, it doesn't... I would say that the Trinitarians interpret the scriptures in better light than the Unitarians. I think with the Unitarian doctrine, you have to kind of twist some of the scriptures here and there, which you don't necessarily... I would say definitely the Gospel of John is definitely a Trinitarian gospel. Right. So I would say that I wasn't convinced by the Jehovah's Witnesses at all, nor the Unitarians I spoke to. Right. Now then, at that point, me and my brother considered converting to Judaism. But when I looked more into that, I realized that Jews weren't really a missionary religion, and they weren't so into taking converts. And just their whole view of things, they don't claim to be a kind of missionary religion where they want converts. They believe that no matter what path you take, you can be saved, essentially, according to most Jews I've spoken to. And so I kind of got put off there. And that's when I started to look into Islam. And I was very much attracted by its doctrines, and I thought they made sense. And did you presumably at some point make a confession? Having spoken to other Muslims, I take it. I did at some point. What it was, essentially, is I researched it for about a year. Unfortunately, my dad, he's Scottish, and I mean, he's got an old way of thinking, and he had been working in the Middle East, and so he had a very bad impression of Muslims from maybe some people he worked with. And so, yeah, I kind of feared converting at first, because I knew that my family wouldn't take it so well. They're quite proud of their Catholic roots. My dad's from an Irish Catholic background, and he went through a lot of persecution in the 70s to stand up for his faith. And so I was really worried about it. I researched Islam for a year, and I too had spiritual experiences, but at the same time, I didn't want to convert based on those, because spiritual experiences are so subjective, in my opinion, that you really need to make sure that you have the intellectual basis as well. And so I waited till I was intellectually convinced, and that's when I said my Shahada, or the Muslim confession, as you would call it.
Really interesting story. I'm just interested to know, but don't feel you have to respond.
Sure.
But with your family, have they kind of come round to the idea that you've converted, or is that still a kind of a difficult thing for them?
I'd put it this way. It's been 7 years since I've converted, and they've literally just come round to it in the past 2 years.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it sounds from what you said earlier, your brother was also on a similar spiritual journey.
He became a devout Catholic, actually.
Okay, so he did not feel the same.
But it was all based on spiritual experience. He doesn't
Right.
like to intellectually discuss religion like me. So.
I see. Okay. Well, really interesting to have you both on the programme today. Thank you so much. And we're going to continue to look into the differences and the reasons, and feel free as we go on to ask questions of each other directly. You know, don't feel that I have to be the go-between, as it were. You're listening to an edition of Unbelievable, as we have Nabeel Qureshi, a former Muslim, now a Christian, and on the other side, Yahya Seymour, former Catholic Christian, now a Muslim. Do you feel that most people, when they do convert one way or the other, do it for intellectual reasons, or what are the other reasons that are at play, do you think? Perhaps starting with you, Nabeel.
I might be biased in what I say. Well, actually, I know I'm biased. Everyone's biased. But from what I've seen and heard, people who convert out of Christianity to Islam, or to any religion for that matter, generally do it out of emotional reasons. If they have intellectual reasons, it's just questions. They don't search enough for the answers. So usually it's something along the lines of, well, I don't believe in God because how did he let my grandmother die? Or how did he let my sister get cancer? Something along those lines, which are very tough questions indeed, but they have answers. Similarly, when it comes to questions like the Trinity or Jesus' death for all mankind, people will ask the questions, but they won't bother to stick around for the answers. They'll leave, and they'll go to something that appeals to them. And in the case of Islam, I was a good rhetorician. I think that I was pretty good at convincing people when I was in middle school and high school that Islam made sense. In fact, when David and I had discussed Christianity and Islam for 3 years, he said, Nabeel, why are you still a Muslim? And I said, David, it's because it makes sense. And it would be that kind of a buzz clip that would make me still want to believe in Islam. But when it came down to the details, like, for example, did Jesus die on the cross? Islam says no. Christianity says yes. All the evidence is unquestionably in favor of Christianity, and yet people will still believe in Islam. So it's not necessarily evidential reasons. There's other reasons usually that people leave Christianity.
Just out of interest purely, but on a worldwide scale, do we have any idea of how many are converting on a maybe yearly basis from Christianity to Islam and vice versa?
Well, I understand in the United States, 30,000 people a year convert to Islam. Now, from what I understand, over the next 3 years, 20,000 will convert back for whatever reason it may be. So we have a standing conversion of 10,000 per year.
Okay.
But as far as actual conversions a year, not including the reversions that will happen down the road, 30,000. That's in the United States.
Any ideas, Yahya, on a worldwide scale?
I make no claims to even know about the United States or the United Kingdom, because I can't say I've spent my time researching statistics or anything like that.
Just on a purely anecdotal front, do you run into others who have had a similar kind of journey to you, Yahya?
Yeah, I certainly meet many people that have converted to Islam due to intellectual reasons and left Christianity also due to intellectual reasons. I would agree with Nabeel that many of the converts you meet, unfortunately, I'd say that we have this thing called convert syndrome, which is when, for example, you have a Muslim who is maybe helping at the church, and then he'll claim that he was a youth minister and he was really into Christianity. And when he speaks, you can clearly tell that he didn't know that much about Christianity. And I wish that Muslims and Christians would stop claiming that people who have converted to their side were so deep into the faith and so knowledgeable and so entrenched in it before. For example, like I've read this ex-Muslim testimony, and the person claims he knew Arabic and Urdu, and then when I spoke to him, he was like, well, yeah, I learned how to read Arabic, but I don't speak it. And it's like, well, okay, then I could claim I learned Latin as well, you know.
Right.
It's very cheap tricks.
Yes, and we've got to be honest in our, in a sense, that probably is an area where I guess there has to be an integrity, Nabeel, to the backstory, you know, and you've obviously been upfront in saying, you know, the sect you were part of in Islam is not regarded by all Muslims as being orthodox in that sense. But nonetheless, you do feel, Nabeel, that you had the core beliefs, if you like, that marked you out as a Muslim.
There are 5 pillars of Islam and 6 articles of faith. The 5 pillars do with activities that Muslims perform at various points in the 6 articles of faith. All these are outlined in the Quran. The 6 articles of faith are things that Muslims believe, and the Ahmadi Muslims believed in all those. The issue of discrepancy is over peripheral doctrine. So
when you finally moved out of Islam and into Christianity, at that point, was it those arguments about the crucifixion and those kinds of things that were the intellectual side that were driving you?
Well, see, it was the search was driven initially to disprove David. The search was driven to say, Islam is true, Christianity is false. It's obvious. How can a man be God? How can God be 3 in 1? This doesn't make any sense. It's logically self-contradictory. And so I was trying to show my friend that Islam was true and Christianity was false. As I began to go deeper and as I began to uncover the issues, I realized that the more and more I looked, the stronger Christianity was becoming evidentially and the weaker Islam was becoming evidentially. And this was intriguing to me because I had all the faith in the world that Islam was true. And so the further I went, I just said, well, when I get to the bottom of this, I'll figure out why Islam's true and Christianity's false. So the drive was to prove Islam. At a certain breaking point, I realized, wait a minute, there is no coming back. Islam does not have the strength for it that I initially thought it did, and Christianity has way more evidence for it than I initially thought it did. You see, there's 3 tenets in Christianity that we can find from Romans 10:9 and 10:10. And those 3 doctrines of Christianity are that Jesus Christ died on the cross, rose from the dead, and claimed to be God. These are the 3 tenets necessary for salvation, according to Paul. And these 3 tenets are the 3 tenets that I debate very heavily. Because if any one of these are false, Christianity is false. It's a chain. All 3 of them have to be strong in order for Christianity to be true. And I find that the evidence for these 3 points is overwhelming. When we actually look at it and we see, did Jesus die on the cross? The answer is a resounding yes. Did he rise from the dead? We see, historically speaking, it's the best defended explanation of the events that we find happening to Jesus after his death is that he rose from the dead. And finally, did he claim to be God? And we see over and over and over again from every aspect of his life that you investigate when he left the situation, everyone agreed, yes, he claims to be God. The Jews agreed, that's why they crucified him. The Christians agreed, that's why they worshipped him.
And obviously those 3 tenets are things specifically, each one of them are things that Islam would deny.
Exactly.
So this is a fundamental, distinction. And why for you, Yahya, were these 3 tenets which Nabeel claims stood out so strongly as being evidentially true, as having the weight of evidence for them? Why did they strike you as false?
Well, with the crucifixion, I'm just going to be honest there and say, yeah, the historical evidence is in its favor, but the Quran says, but it appeared so unto them. So the Quran is not actually denying that people will think the crucifixion happened historically. I mean, I don't think Tacitus went around investigating from eyewitnesses whether or not the event actually happened. So if people believed it happened, it's just merely affirming what the Quran said for me. With the issue of a resurrection, it's a topic I'm gathering my resources for, and I'd love to debate Nabeel on it one day. And with evidence for Jesus claiming to be deity, I think that Nabeel is maybe not giving us the more nuanced picture, which is that many academics in the field of studying Christology, which is the historical Jesus, they're actually coming out and saying that, well, Jesus probably didn't think he was God, so on and so forth. I mean, he can find a few conservative Christians that do say that he did. But I think that Nabeel needs to give a more nuanced view and state that, yeah, well, there's 2 views on this.
Well, I would like to point out that he's making it sound as if only evangelical Christians are the ones saying that Jesus claimed to be God. We know right here in the UK, Larry Hurtado, who's a professor of Christology, has said that there's no doubt that the Christians from the earliest strata of Christianity were unanimously convinced that Jesus was God, and as such they attributed honors to him and rights to him, as people do only to deity. We also have in Scotland, your home country, we have Bauckham.
Who will be a guest, in fact, in a couple of months' time. Yeah, on this program. So
I will be listening.
Richard Bauckham, yeah, it's going to be great.
Richard Bauckham wrote some amazing books, one of which is God Crucified. And in it,
his latest is actually on this specific Christology issue, Jesus and the God of Israel, and we're going to be debating that book.
Let me know, Justin, when that's how. I will be listening from the U.S. I'll come over here if I have to. But he's of the position that the attributes attributed to Jesus, his sovereignty for one and his creatorship for another, are two attributes that were only ever ascribed to Yahweh in the Second Temple Judaism period. And those were then ascribed to Jesus. And that was done at a remarkably early time frame. And so now we have Bauckham, we have Burridge, we have Hurtado, we have Burridge and Gould saying similar things, and I wouldn't call these men evangelical Christians. Perhaps Bauckham, but I wouldn't say the rest are. So we have people from not just evangelical Christianity saying these things. We have them from all across the spectrum.
Sorry, might I come
yes,
back on that?
Yes, please do.
Well, sure. Sorry, I shouldn't have said evangelical. I should have said conservative. But what I would say to that is Nabeel's just arguing ad verecundium here, and he's just citing names and dropping names for us. If I had prepared and I had brought my list of names, I could have easily done the same thing. In fact, I would encourage people to watch my debate with his colleague David Wood on this issue. And I think I presented the other side of the case. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared for it now. But on a second front, he's talking about how the earliest Christians believed that Jesus was God. Well, there might have been a strata of early people believing Jesus is God. We have a companion of a prophet known as Imam Ali, alayhi salam, and we had people within Ali's lifetime claiming that Ali was part of a trinity with Muhammad. So, I mean, should we believe that's the truth just because we have people claiming it? I don't think so.
Well, I think I'd like to respond to that, Justin, if I can. I'm not just name-dropping here. I'm giving the reasons. For one, Hurtado mentions that people were doing rites to Jesus, such as taking communion in his name, baptizing in his name. We see these things happening within the New Testament, which is the earliest stratum of Christian documents we have available. These are things that people only did with deities. They didn't baptize in the name of humans. They didn't go around taking communion in the name of humans. These were things that only deities were receiving the honors of. So that's Hurtado's argument. We have from Bauckham the argument that in the earliest stratum of Christianity, again, from the books such as Paul's books, the book of Hebrews as well, we see people ascribing to Jesus the characteristics of sovereign and creator, and no one received these titles except for Yahweh. So when people in the earliest stratum of Christianity now are saying Jesus is God, we have on the earliest level established that people thought Jesus was God. Now to respond to your second contention, you say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus was God. True. But we don't have any sort of argument coming at all from anyone that he did not claim to be God, that he was simply just a prophet up until the mid to late 2nd century. So every person who walked away from Jesus' life and documented anything about what he thought about himself said he was claiming to be divine. All the ways he approaches his life, people say, when we look at the New Testament manuscripts as well as the extra-biblical manuscripts, that he was doing things about his identity which caused people to say he was committing blasphemy, and which can only mean that he was claiming to be divine, according to Darrell Bach, who's a scholar out in the United States. So what we have here is on both fronts, his from Hurtado and from Bauckham, we have multiple reasons to believe Jesus claimed to be God, and no reason to think he didn't until the late 2nd century, evidentially speaking.
We're going to have to take a quick break here, gents, and we'll come back into this. And perhaps we'll also progress a bit more on what difference being a Christian or being a Muslim has made as well, because obviously we often debate the intellectual arguments on this programme, and there's an archive of programmes where people can dig
But do
those
let me
out.
come back to you more.
I will. But we'll. I'd like to kind of explore also what it means for you personally, to this change, if you like. And so we'll go into that as well. You're listening to Unbelievable, a Muslim and a Christian discussing their change of mind, their change of faith, as Nabeel explains why he changed from Islam to Christianity, and Yahya explains why he converted from Christianity to Islam. Or perhaps reverted, as Muslims often like to call it. So do keep listening, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes' time here on Unbelievable.
What I want to invite Roger to comment on is, why couldn't the mental realm include an infinite consciousness?
It's too much like us. It's too much like
him.
Putting it like the Greek views of the gods in some sense. They were too much like us.
They were finite and contingent. Here we're talking about a metaphysically necessary source.
I admire this noble aspiration to find the highest possible ideal. It's almost as if you're proposing a new religion to meet this new challenge.
It's not a new religion.
Yes.
What it is something that sits in the same place. It addresses some of the same needs, but it is not founded on the same principle.
If the New Testament says that Jesus did X, Y, and Z, Did he do it or not?
I don't think it's a story that's made by committee. Am I going to have a later literary genius who comes up with a great story like this? Or am I going to say, no, Jesus is the genius, and somehow that story has basically been preserved?
Listening to Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Hello, I'm Justin Brierley and you're listening to Unbelievable, and we're airing a few classic replays over the summer. Today's first aired in 2009 and features Nabeel Qureshi and Yahya Seymour. Nabeel, a convert to Christianity from Islam, and Yahya, a convert to Islam from Christianity. And we rejoin the show as Yahya pushes back on the question of the divinity of Jesus.
What I would say is I've gathered quite a few documents on this, and I did debate his colleague on David Wood on this. Unfortunately, unlike Nabeel, I haven't got a master's in apologetics from a conservative Christian university, and so I can't name drop off the top of my head or drop arguments off the top of my head so quickly. But what I would suggest is people go back to books like Christology in the Making by James D.G. Dunn and read his arguments against the sort of things that Nabeel are putting forth. And even James D.G. Dunn has a book on the Christology of Paul as well. I forget the title now. But I would recommend these works because, in my opinion, they completely reconcile and square up everything.
Interesting. I mean, and there are a number of programs I could recommend from the Unbelievable archive on this end. Particularly, we did a debate back in January between two guys who wrote a book together, a Christian and non-Christian, debating these types of issues. That was trying to get the name off the top of my head and completely failing. James Crossley and Michael Bird, and that was an evangelical and a non-Christian historians of the Bible.
And Justin, just to let you know, we have a book that we're in the making right now, David and I are, with two Muslims debating various issues. That should be out next year, God willing. The topics in that are who is Jesus and who is Muhammad. So I discussed this very issue, Christology, with a Muslim scholar of comparative religion.
I have to confess that I find huge amounts of material out there in the Christian-Muslim debate kind of sphere. Loads of scholarship. I mean, why do you find it in Muslim-Christian debate, but you'd be hard-pressed to find nearly as much in Jewish-Christian or Islamic Hindu, maybe, or something like that? I don't know. Is it?
I think it has a lot to do with what Yahya already said as far as the evangelical component of Judaism. You don't have too many people trying to convert people to Judaism. So that's one part of it. And I also think that Muslims and Christians both agree Jesus was important, but what Muslims do to Jesus' identity is blasphemy and just is something that Christians can't handle, which is taking God and saying, hey, he was just a man. And to what Muslims think about Jesus, they'll say the same thing about the Christians. They'll say what they're doing to Jesus is blasphemy. They're taking a man and making him God. So I think both of us, as far as Muslims and Christians are concerned, are trying to preserve the honor of Jesus.
It's interesting as well that obviously you've both come along a long way probably in your understanding since becoming a Christian or a Muslim. I mean, in your case, Yahya, when you did convert to Islam, I mean, you probably didn't know nearly as much as you know now.
Not half as much, no.
And do you feel like what you've learnt since has cemented that faith? Has it made it more nuanced? Has it kind of changed it?
Yeah, when I first moved up to London, your colleague Jay Smith, he started asking questions about Islam, which kind of put me on the spot, and they did shake me up because I'm not the kind of person that likes to be blind faith. If there's something I have a problem with, I'll try and see what there is. I'll have a problem with it until I can find a solution for it. But what I did was I investigated the historical issues of Islam. He has this particular thesis he likes to bring up called Hagerism. I looked into the evidence for that, found it was so easily refutable. And then I did look into evidence for Christianity. To be honest, the Christian debaters over here don't give nearly as strong evidence for Christianity as Nabeel and his colleague David. So it wasn't until I started listening to people like them that I started looking into the evidence for Christianity. And yeah, I would say that I've found evidence on the side of Islam, to be honest.
It's interesting because, as you know, I did a programme on the debates that happened down at Hyde Park, at the corner there, and really interesting, very different, very kind of full on and loud and everything else. But it seems to me that Muslims who are serious, very committed to their faith, they kind of are more prepared to engage with an evangelical Christian approach than any other, because they do see almost that evangelical Christians do really believe the texts that they hold to be sacred.
I'll be honest with you, Vera. I think that's because, no offence, but I think the average Muslim on the street and the average Muslim da'i on the street and the average evangelical Christian here in London, they're not prepared for the serious kind of apologetics that certain Christian apologists are and certain Muslim apologists are. So I think at Speaker's Corner is just kind of a clash of two unmovable forces that are so passionate in their faith and are reading a bunch of pamphlets produced by apologists from the street thinking they can convert each other.
I mean, do you feel that kind of debate format is kind of not that productive then, ultimately, or it's a starting point maybe? I don't know.
It was a starting point for me, but one thing I would hope is that people progress beyond that, start looking into proper academic scholarship, not only within Islam but also in Christianity and vice versa. Like, I wish more Muslims would be learning Greek and Hebrew and more Christians would be learning Arabic and going back to our original sources and getting into a serious, more high level of apologetics.
Well, as I say, I'm sure people will get that kind of scholarly approach and a very kind of, in-depth feel for things if they go along to these debates happening in the coming week. But, Nabeel, I wanted to kind of move us maybe on to talking a little bit more about what difference it made to you becoming a Christian. You were certainly very committed to your faith as a Muslim. What difference did it make when that moment finally came and you said yes to Jesus Christ?
Well, that's an excellent question. As I've been pointing out so far, it was really a hard battle, evidentially. And to me, it was a matter of truth. If Christianity is true, I'll believe it. God, I want to believe who you are. I don't care what you tell me about yourself. I want to believe who you are, and that's about it. Same with Islam. If Islam is true, I want to believe that. So for me, it was a search of the matter of truth. And that's why I spent so much time focusing on the evidence and the arguments. When I finally realized Christianity was true, it still took a while for me to believe Christianity because of my ties to Islam. After I became a Muslim, there was a moment of... after I became a Christian, there was a moment of getting adjusted. It was a matter of shock. It was a matter of, okay, I believe in Christianity now. And just, wow, Jesus was God. Now I actually believe this. What are the implications? And, he died on the cross for me. What are the implications of that? And slowly, over a matter of a few months, the power of the gospel just permeated my core. And it was not so much a God who would look down on his people and command them how to be and what to do in order to earn his favor and to try to strive for a reward that will come who knows when. As Abu Bakr has said, even if I had 1 foot, Abu Bakr being the first Khalifa of Islam, he said, even if I have 1 foot in paradise, I would fear the deception of Allah. In other words, Muslims have no idea if they're going to heaven or not. And so Muslims strive with all their might to please God for the purpose of getting into heaven. Now, some Muslims, of course, would just want to please God for his own sake, but so many that I know personally are just trying to make sure that they earn their way into heaven. And this became a huge difference all of a sudden. When I became a Christian, it was no longer a matter of me trying to earn my way into heaven. It was now God's already paved the way, so all I have to do is sit back and love him with my whole heart. I don't have to worry about anything. I can just love him for who he is. We can have this relationship of father and son. He has already done everything he could for me to be with him in all eternity, and all I have to do is accept it. So now I just have to love him and share that love. This changes everything. No longer are you doing things out of duty. You're doing it out of love. No longer are you doing things as a slave. You're doing it as a son. And slowly I began to realize that the other people who are out there, I need to love them as my brothers because God is my father and he is their father. So this concept of love first permeated and transformed me, and then it went on to my perception of others. And so this concept of Christianity, love, which is the core of Christianity, it's the greatest thing in Christianity is love. If we look at Jesus' commandment in Matthew 22, he says the greatest of these, he says, love the Lord your God, and then look at your enemy or your neighbor as yourself. This is love. Everywhere it's love. And that changes who you are. If you realize this world is based off love, that the greatest thing you can do is towards God is love, and towards others is love, that will change you entirely. And that's what happened in my life. And now I have this concept of perfect peace, that I don't have to earn my way into heaven, that all I have to do, that all God has commanded me to do is to love Him and love others.
And you do feel that that is the approach that many Muslims that you meet do have to faith, which is this idea of never being sure of salvation in that sense.
Absolutely. Muhammad himself used to say, Astaghfirullah Rabbi min kulli zambin wa atubu ilayh. 70 times a day he would ask God for mercy, because he did not know whether he himself was going to be going into heaven. Only the people who die in martyrdom, in other words, jihad, are guaranteed entrance into heaven. And so, this is a huge difference between Christianity and Islam. Now, I wouldn't say become a Christian just so you can know you're in heaven. Absolutely not. That's not the reason you should become a Christian. You have to first understand your sinful nature before God, repent, and then accept the gospel. But once you do become a Christian, I'll tell you what, it is amazing to have that freedom, to know that you are going to be with God, because He has forgiven you of all your sins. And all you have to do at this point is spend your time focusing on love.
Yeah. Response to that, but also what the difference for you was when you converted to Islam.
I'll quickly respond to that first. What I would say is, well, Nabeel clearly knew a very different conception of the deity that I know, because I know God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Al-Wadud, which means the all-loving. It literally means that He is loving in His nature. And when I go back to the Quran, I see in Surah 40, Ayah 40, that God promises those who follow the religion of Islam and perform the pillars, that they will be in heaven. And so I wouldn't have the audacity, like certain Christians, to say that I'm guaranteed a place in heaven, because I believe that, I have free will. One day I might apostatize, who knows, God only knows. And so I wouldn't have the audacity to say I'm guaranteed a place in heaven. But what I would say is, if I continue on this path, I know I'll be in heaven. And as to what Nabeel quoted from Abu Bakr, I don't know if Abu Bakr said that or not. Nabeel would have to give me a source and an isnad for that so I could check it up. But I would take a quote from the first Imam of the Muslims, Imam Ali alayhi salam, who said that the worship of a Muslim, it should not be worship for fear of getting into heaven, for that is the worship of a slave. It should not be worship for love of paradise, for that is the worship of a businessman. It should be worship for the love of God, for that is the worship of a free man. And that's the kind of worship I wish to be upon.
Yeah, and so you have not had any of that sense of working your way into salvation that Nabeel speaks of, that was his experience of Islam.
No, I'm glad I didn't come from a Qadiani background. Maybe it's a lot more rigorous than the kind of Islam I know.
I would have to just counter that. He's probably the first Muslim I've ever spoken to, and trust me, I've spoken to a lot of Muslims. He's the first Muslim I've ever heard who's had that opinion. The entire basis of salvation in Islam is works-based, good deeds over bad deeds. Certain good deeds erase certain bad deeds. God can multiply certain good deeds to cover certain bad deeds. So constantly, if you look through the ahadith and the sunnah, you see, which are the traditions of Islam, you see people trying to earn their way into heaven from day one. Muhammad himself said he did not know whether or not he was going to heaven. And so this concept of, as long as I stay on this path, I will go to heaven, that doesn't seem to be something...
When you said that first, if you like, confession of Islam, that is not necessarily the guarantee then that you are saved in Islam.
Well, we believe that anyone that says the Shahada will end up in heaven eventually, even if they're the worst sinner. But what I would say to Nabeel on that is, well, I'm not sure how many Muslims Nabeel's met, but I know that Bassam Zawadi, who's actually working on the book with Nabeel and David, that book Nabeel was talking about, who was Jesus, who was Muhammad. In his debate on salvation in Islam and Christianity, he does actually mention that Islam's not a works-based religion. It's based on faith and works, just like the Epistle of James in the New Testament. So, I mean, I don't think Nabeel should downplay these things and say that Islam's entirely works-based, because, I mean, surely as a former Muslim you should know that, unless the Qadiani faith is entirely based on works, I'm not sure.
Well, of course you have to first say your faith in Islam. You have to say the Shahada. But as far as beyond that, whether you go to heaven or hell, at first at least, is based on the issue of works.
Sorry, secondly, the isnad about the Prophet Muhammad not being guaranteed a place in heaven, the isnad for that is actually faulty according to the Rujal system I use. So there's a chain of narrations for every hadith, and we authenticate the narrators.
Okay.
So I wouldn't even take that as evidence. And secondly, I think I've quoted from the Quran, which is the primary source in Islam. So any hadith which contradicts the Quran, we're told by Imam Jafar as-Sadiq to throw it against the wall. because the Quran is always the primary source. That's the literal word of God.
Interesting stuff. I've heard it said before. I presumably you would agree with this, Nabeel, but I'd be interested to get your take on it as well, Yahya. That to some extent Christianity is the only religion that involves the concept of grace, whereas other religions are very much about, what you sow, you reap, and that sort of thing. Sure. Some kind of karma,
classic,
or whatever it might be. Do you agree with that, Nabeel? Yahya. That there is no concept of grace in Islam.
C.S. Lewis argument. I've heard it a lot from a lot of Christians that quote the book Mere Christianity to me. C.S. Lewis said that Christianity is the only religion of grace. But if anyone studies religion at university, just religious studies in general, history of religions, you'll realize that's not true. Islam has a clear-cut concept of grace called lutf. Allah is al-latif, the one who gives grace. And so we do believe in grace as well. We do believe that God has given us all these bounties and that God actually does give us grace. So I think it's a straw man argument against other religions for Christianity to claim we're the only ones that believe in pure grace.
What do you make of the idea that grace is something, in a sense, unique to Christianity? I suppose it depends on how you define grace, doesn't it, Nabeel?
Right. I would say mercy is not giving you what you deserve, and grace is giving you what you don't deserve. In other words, grace is giving you something that you haven't earned for yourself. And the Christian view, that's heaven. Now, we have to differentiate between those two concepts. I think there is a great degree of mercy in Islam. God will give mercy to someone. If he does one good deed, God will multiply it 10 times over. And so there is this mercy concept. Yes, I believe that's all over the place. As far as grace is concerned, giving someone something they did not deserve at all, heaven to sinners, that is something I don't see in Islam. You see the mercy, you don't see the grace. Once you differentiate the two, I think it's clear. There is no grace in Islam.
Just as a kind of hypothetical situation, if a Christian would say, if you took the worst sinner in the world and they, at their deathbed moment, confess their faith in Jesus, ask for forgiveness, they, even in all their sin in the past, at that moment would receive salvation. In a Muslim view, would that be the case if they made a confession?
If Adolf Hitler on his deathbed said the Shahada, then he'd be in heaven as well,
And there's no sense in which the fact that they haven't done anything from that point, to merit salvation in terms of the good deeds, etc., that doesn't make a difference as far as you're concerned.
No, as soon as you say the Shahada, all your sins are wiped away.
So it is forgiveness in that sense.
It is forgiveness. And I'm not sure what Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, the prophet of Qadianism, taught about Islam, but we do have a concept known as lutf, which is grace. We believe that God has given us so many things which we don't deserve. I mean, I was one of the worst of sinners. I don't know why God guided me to Islam. So I do think it's a little immature to start claiming that no other religion has the concept of grace.
I do think there's a difference in definition here, and it's important to make sure we're on the same grounds semantically speaking. I think we're working off different definitions. As far as constantly referring to Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, I don't think you realize, but I did actually read Ahadith and Sunnat when I was an Ahmadi Muslim, and as most Ahmadi Muslims do, they do go off of Ahadith. I think that what Yahya is saying is truly unique. I've never heard any Muslim say this. I'm going to go back to the U.S. When I do go back, I'm going to ask Muslim scholars and say, hey, do you believe this is orthodox? And he's been accusing me of being unorthodox this whole time. I'm going to see if...
well, I am a Shia, so...
Oh, that's true. You're Shia. That does change a lot. Okay. Did you make that clear?
I'm afraid that I'm... sadly, these differences, I'm afraid, are not something that I'm terribly up,
Okay, so in Islam, 80 to 85% of Muslims are what are known as Sunni Muslims, and that's considered the Orthodox Islam. Yahya comes from a group known as Shia, which is 10 to 15% of Muslims, and they believe in a different set of interpretations to the religion and a different overall doctrine. So, this whole time I've been talking to you as if you're Sunni. Now I got to switch modes.
Sure.
Let me just, while you switch modes, let the listener know that if you want to contribute, if you want to feedback on anything you're hearing today on the programme, you're more than welcome to email unbelievable@premier.org.uk. Always enjoy reading your emails out, and we'll be hearing some of your response towards the end of the programme today.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Does it make a lot of difference then, the fact that you are Shia, to the way that you approach your faith, your concept of God and forgiveness and the good, the works versus, if you like, grace-based?
It makes a slight difference, but what I would say to that is I've also, like the majority of my friends on the Muslim Dawah Initiative, are actually Sunnis. So I can kind of speak on behalf of Sunnis here when I say that they do have a concept of grace, and they do not believe that religion or Islam is a works-based faith. In fact, as I said, there's a good debate on this on YouTube, Bassam Zawadi versus Pastor Fabiti, on salvation in Islam and Christianity. And constantly Muslims are making it clear that Islam's not a works-based religion. So I'm a little surprised. Maybe Nabeel's been speaking to some Muslims on the street that don't seem to know much stuff. I mean, the debates he's put on answering Muslims, the Muslims he speaks to don't seem to be in tune with the teachings of Islam or seem to know how to respond. So maybe that's why he's getting such answers.
What's your concept then of the difference it would make when you said you're having to change modes, Nabeel, and talking to Yahya as a Shia Muslim? What difference would that make to you?
It makes a big difference. For example, the majority of the references I use when I investigate early Islam, I use what Sunni Muslims say are trustworthy. And the reason why is because, like I said, 80 to 85% of Muslims are Sunni. And so I go to them and I say, what do you consider the most trustworthy sources? And they'll refer me to Sahih Sitta, including books such as Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, books along those lines. And when I go to the earliest biographies, I'll read such as Ibn Ishaq. I'll read things from Tabari. These are the earliest books of biography from Muhammad's life. So notice when Muslims investigate when Christians investigate Islam, they will go to the earliest Muslim sources. They'll go to the Muslims and say, what do you consider most trustworthy and why? And even if we disagree, we use those things to help prove our case. And Shia use generally a different set. Now, I don't know about Yahya specifically, but Shia will say, oh, that's, such and such. We don't trust that. And so they'll throw certain things out that Sunnis just accept offhand. It gets quite intricate.
Could I just respond to that generally? The Sunnis don't accept everything in Sahih Sitta, to be precise. In fact, they only accept Sahihain, and even then, if something's broken chained in there, if there's a break in the Isnad, they don't accept it to be Sahih. So I think that's a misrepresentation of the Sunnis. They only accept Muslim and Bukhari to be entirely Sahih, with the exception of one or two hadith which are broken chained. And secondly, they don't accept Ibn Ishaq or Tabari to be entirely authentic either. They are early sources, but I mean, there is earlier sources than Tabari. There's Yaqubi, there's Mas'udi. So I mean, I don't know why we're always going back to Tabari.
Let's just got a couple of minutes left in this section of the programme, and just wanted in a couple of minutes for you to spell out for yourself, Yahya, the difference it made coming to Islam in terms of the spiritual difference it made to you. Because you've obviously said the intellectual arguments were really what took you down that road, but what difference did it make when you finally said the Shahada?
Well, one thing I felt, when I was 15, at that time I really needed this kind of spiritual discipline and this rigorous discipline. And at that time, I found that discipline in Islam. I mean, it made me a much better person. My parents are recognizing this. They're saying that, we're so proud of you now. You've learned to stand on your own 2 feet. You're a lot more mature than you were. You're a lot more kinder to your mother, so on and so forth. And I think everyone's noticed a change in my behavior. I mean, I'm not saying that Christians don't have a change in their behavior. I'm sure Nabeel's a much better person now. Maybe. I'm not sure. But, I would say that I did become a much better person, and I feel that my relationship with God has improved so much, and that I have a loving relationship with God, and that I can know him through the teachings of Islam.
Did you feel like you, in any sense, knew him in your days, if you like, in your childhood, Catholic kind of upbringing?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, my dad used to live abroad quite a lot, so whenever I would go to him, we'd have to go to these non-denominational kind of conservative American churches, which, because he was often based in Muslim countries, would be in hotels, for example, where all the Christians from America and the expatriates would come together. And they did have this kind of very joyous relationship with Jesus thing going on. And at that time, I would say, I did get into the emotional hype of things, and I did say I felt a relationship with Jesus. But then again, I've spoken to many people from different faiths who claim to have a relationship with different deities. So,
and you kind of, as you said, are not so taken with subjective experience. But is there a sense in which then it's the discipline of Islam that appeals to you?
Not really. I don't think I would ever convert to a religion purely on the basis of its akhlaq or on its moral teachings, because that doesn't make sense. For example, if I believed Christianity was true, but Islam had the best discipline, I'd probably be a Christian, but just practice the kind of rigorous discipline of Islam.
Okay.
But no, it's because of Islam's intellectual teachings that I would follow.
Primarily. Yeah. Really interesting. So we're just coming to the end of this second section, gentlemen. Going to be finishing up our conversation and getting your feedback to past programmes in just a moment's time here on Unbelievable.
If you listen to Unbelievable with Justin Brierley on Premier Christian Radio and enjoy the conversations between Christians and skeptics, then this is the perfect app for you. For the latest updates, podcasts, videos, articles, bonus content and much more, download the Premier Unbelievable app today.
Welcome back to the final part of this week's edition of Unbelievable with me, Justin Brierley. We're airing a few classic replay editions of the show over the summer, pulling out some gems from the archive. And today on the show we're hearing a discussion that took place between Nabeel Qureshi and Yahya Seymour all the way back in 2009. If you can continue listening this evening here on Premier Christian Radio, I'll be chatting with Ken Costa from Holy Trinity Brompton. He's my guest, talking about bringing the life of Christ to the life of the world of finance and banking. And you can find the profile on its own Profile podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. We are doing a few classic replays over the summer as I'm making some time, some space for some research and writing for a new book on conversion. So if you have a great conversion story, you know someone who's got an interesting story along the lines maybe of either Yahya or Nabeel's, or indeed from atheism to Christianity, I'd be really interested to hear from you. You can get in touch with the show, as I've said already on today's programme, unbelievable@premier.org.uk. Let's get into the final part of today's discussion.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
So just finishing our discussion this afternoon with my two guests here in the studio. They are Nabeel Qureshi, who recently earned his doctorate, and he's doing this speaking and debate tour with David Wood, both of them from Apologetics Ministry Acts 17. They're debating a number of Muslims, including Yahya Seymour, who's with me here in the studio, and we've been hearing his conversion story, and Nabeel's as well. Fascinating stuff, gentlemen, and thank you both for coming in, giving your time up to be on the programme today. And I do hope the debates go really well, whatever well counts for in both of your books. But
thanks.
Ultimately, do you think, Nabeel, that people, if you like, have to do what Yahya was talking about, which is get the intellectual understanding right before you can make a kind of faith commitment? Is that because probably in reality that's not the way it actually works necessarily for most people, is it? So what is faith then when it comes to the intellect and the spiritual side of it?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, a friend of mine out in the United States, Mark Middleberg, just wrote a book about this called Choosing Your Faith. He outlined 6 different methods people use in order to come to a faith. Some people believe in things because of authority. Some people believe in things because of mysticism. Some people believe in things because of relativism, what have you. I think he is correct in his conclusion that the best way to approach one's faith is to first understand what the truth is evidentially. If you just want to hear what you like and go for what you think sounds best to you, then you're basically going through a buffet line of religions, and you're picking what you like from one religion and adding it to what you like from another religion. You end up with a smorgasbord, and you take a bunch of dessert and you throw that on there, and there you go. There you have your religion. Or you might even say, well, I believe in Islam because that's what my parents taught me. None of these paths is going to make you feel satisfied at the end of the day. It's as Yahya and I are both saying, you need to sit down and investigate what's true, and truth at the end of the day is what will give you strength to put firmness in your faith. Now then you ask, well, what is faith? I think that faith is simply this. There are things you can know through investigation, and then there are things you have to trust God on beyond that. For example, in Christianity, I think you can know from investigation that God exists through investigating the world around you, through science, through philosophy, through logic. You can know that God exists. I think beyond that, you can know that Jesus Christ died on the cross, claimed to be God, and you can know with fairly high degree of certainty that he rose from the dead. And so what's the issue of faith? The issue of faith here is that God will deliver on his promises, that God will grant you eternal salvation and security with him in heaven for all eternity because he loves you. And because he sacrificed himself for you. That's where the faith is, that I know who God is and I believe his word. I have faith in what he said he is going to do.
And that's very much your story, you'd say, in terms of the way you came at it. Obviously, you had these intellectual starting point, if you like, which was this long-running kind of discussions you had and with David, but that eventually led you to a point where you saw the spiritual difference, I suppose, in terms of where that faith led you.
Well, actually, I didn't even see the spiritual difference until after I became a Christian. It was a matter of, it was tooth and nail. Islam is true, and we're fighting this war of attrition. Every single time I looked into the issues, I realized the evidence was in favor of Christianity, and I appreciate what Yahya has said. It started off with me with the death of Christ, that yes, the death of Christ is something undeniable, historically and evidentially speaking. You can use some sort of philosophical way around it, but historically and evidentially, the death of Jesus on the cross is undeniable, it's incontrovertible. And from that starting point, I realized, wait a minute, everything is in favor of the Christian arguments. And so it was an evidential start. And then when I realized it was true, and then I had the spiritual journey, which God showed me it was true. I didn't fully conceptualize that spirituality, but God showed me spiritually that Christianity was true. Then I accepted Christianity, and then the spirituality conversion, the spiritual conversion, where I realized what God is all about, love. That happened after I became a Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on the programme as well.
No problem.
I mean, you've already said that for you the intellectual foundations are absolutely primary, if you like.
Sure.
They've got to be in place. But I can imagine most Muslims, you know, the average Muslim, if you like, that's they don't necessarily have all the intellectual, stuff that you have as the basis. So there must be a sense in which you believe as a Muslim that there is just a pure faith aspect to it. You know, someone's prepared to hear Allah is God and Muhammad is his prophet, and that's enough, and that can be the start of faith.
What I would say to that is I've had debates on this with some of my Muslim colleagues. They believe that just because you're born into a Muslim family and you want to and you feel comfortable there and you follow it, that's sufficient. But I tell them that in the Quran, Nabi Ibrahim, who is Abraham according to the Bible, rebukes people for saying that we follow the ways of our forefathers, saying that your forefathers knew nothing, why are you following their ways blindly? So I would like for all Muslims to be critical thinking and start investigating the evidence for all religions and their own way of life, every ideology, so on and so forth. And I hope that happens in the future.
And where do you see your own sort of path going? Do you feel that you are, if you like, apologetics for Islam is kind of a future for you? Do you feel that might be a calling in that sense on your life?
Well, I'd like to go into academia. My main interests are historical Muhammad, Quranic exegesis, Quranic hermeneutics, and areas like that. But I would like to do apologetics as a part-time thing. I mean, I don't think there's really a career option for people to go into full-time apologetics over here, especially not Muslims. And I do it as a part-time thing, and I do it mainly to try and encourage other Muslims to think, because if they can see that there's other people coming up and attacking Islam, why are they just relying on people like Shabir Ali and other Muslims who are providing arguments? But they need to start thinking for themselves. They can't just rely on other people to provide arguments. And so I'm trying to encourage more Muslims to think in that sense. But as for my aims, I'm currently studying in a Shia Hausa seminary right now, so I'm planning to graduate and so on and so forth.
Nabeel, this for you is obviously, I guess, a calling. You feel that this is what you were, if you like, the purpose behind, if you like, your conversion, apart from obviously your own salvation, it was to spread this message further.
Absolutely. I was in the middle of medical school when I came to Christ, and I looked at my medical degree and I said, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to be a doctor and spread the truth through medicine, or am I going to be an apologist and use the ministry to hopefully affect more lives than I ever could as a doctor? And I'm leaning towards the latter. Financially speaking, I might have to pursue the medical field for a while. I'm in horrible debt, and all I have to show for it is a diploma on the wall. So I might have to pursue the medical field, but my preference would be to spend my entire life defending the gospel and showing people its truth. Also discussing Islam. It's really been a new thing. It's only this most recent generation of apologists or defenders of the faith where people are actually discussing Islam. Normally, Muslims, when they debated Christians for the past few decades, have debated Christian topics. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Did he claim to be God? This is new to discuss Islam. And in fact, very few debates have been done on the one, for example, that I'll be doing with Bassam. Is the Quran perfectly preserved? I, in fact, have heard of none. I was going to research and see what people have said. I couldn't find a single debate that's been done on this topic. So I think that we're going to be bringing some new information to people, and that's what I feel like my life is for.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, again, for coming in and joining me on the show. Don't forget to check out the Unbelievable webpage if you want to find out more details about this debate lineup coming up. And I hope you can get along to some. And if you do go and you found out through this programme, drop me a line, say what you thought. And I'm sure we'll see you gentlemen again at some point down the line. I'm guessing this won't be the last trip that you guys make from Act 17 over to the UK. Nabeel, so thank you very much for joining us.
God bless you.
And thank you, Yahya, for coming in.
That's no problem.
Well, my guest, Yahya Seymour, convert from Christianity to Islam, and Nabeel Qureshi, convert from Islam to Christianity. I wonder what you thought about it all. Get in touch via the usual methods. Unbelievable@premier.org.uk.
For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to the Unbelievable podcast. And for more updates and bonus content, sign up to the Unbelievable newsletter.